Hello and welcome to an unexpected Mac Trains. Apologies, I feel I've spammed you a bit this week. Been a lot on. But this is really an opinion piece. Sam of Sam's Trains has a video up, just released, reviewing the new TT120 Terrier. And he gives it a good review. He is consistent in his review style. And this is one of the reasons, I think, why people return to his content and continue to enjoy his content. Because you can do something through his videos. You can genuinely compare one model to another in certain key areas, which are conducted in a consistent and objective manner. So if you're watching this video because you saw the title and you think, oh, this will be a mudslinging exercise at Sam, it's not. Please go away. I think Sam deserves his place as the leading YouTuber for the hobby in the UK, in that he provides a service that really isn't replicated anywhere else, with his in-depth reviews, and because of the quantity of them as well. He has, I think, fairly reviewed virtually every major TT120 release from Hornby. Not everything do I agree with, but he's entitled to do so and done so well. Most of it I do. It would be odd if we agreed 100% on anything. So there's no sense in which Sam has either disparaged or ignored TT120. But in his title for this recent review, he raised an important question as to pricing, and he comments on it in his review. TT120 is not cheap, not as almost anything in this hobby. But is the pricing fair? Because this is where I do take issue with the title and to an extent the comments in the review itself. So let's look more closely at this important question. So, I think that there are perhaps three ways of gauging, pun intended, if a model has its pricing correct. I would say the three ways are comparable pricing, demand for the model, exorbitant manufacturer profits. Now, there are other factors at play in pricing which are relevant, such as the size of the market, or the order being placed at least, material costs, component costs, model complexity, and risk. All of these have an impact in setting prices, obviously. And I want to look at these other factors quite briefly and then give more attention to the three main metrics I've identified for pricing fairness. The factors, the size of the market, that's something very difficult to tell for sure. But it seems likely, or at least we're not far off, if we suggest that TT120 is about comparable to N scale in terms of its place in the UK market. At a very rough guess, that means TT120 has less than, likely way less than 10% market share compared to 00. That means manufacturer is going to put away smaller orders, which in turn means higher unit costs for each model that is produced. That's simply known as economies of scale. It's been around a long time. It's well understood. Pardon the pun there as well. That wasn't intended. Economies of scale. Anyway, but it is economics 101. And anyone commenting on prices, especially when accusing a company of ripping off its customers, I think needs to take this into account. Clearly, with a smaller market, TT models would be expected to be priced higher than 00 models if this was the only factor at play. But that factor alone would push it up the way. But then you look at other factors, material costs, because if you use less material, you get charged less for the material you've used. Using less plastic for a model means less material cost. Same applies to using less paint. less metal. So on that fact alone, TT models should be cheaper than 00. But it should be noted that I think all analysts in this industry agree, and Sam certainly knows this as well as anybody else, he's not daft. Material costs are a minute fraction of overall cost, almost to the point of being negligible. But if we don't talk about material costs, what about component costs? I think that's probably more relevant. Well, whether TT or 00, every wagon needs 4 buffers, at least 2 axles and 4 wheels. It needs 2 couplings. Every loco needs a motor. It needs pickups. It needs wiring. It needs a DCC socket. So I think in terms of component cost, you'd probably say it's a wash. But then you come to model complexity. It's fair to say 00 models tend to be more complex in terms of features offered. No TT models yet have firebox flickers or sprung buffers, at least not unless you go to a specialist to have it modified. On that alone, 00 models are more complex. However, if we view complexity of a model in terms of, I couldn't think of a better word, in terms of its fiddliness to assemble, then the smaller scale becomes noticeably more complex. You think of the steam of a valve gear of a steam loco. The valve gear now almost half the size of 00. You think of the tiny wire handrails, other separately fitted parts that have to be applied with the tiniest dab of glue to hold it in place but not show on the loco. You think of putting in, even in a diesel, wiring in the headlamps or cab lights. It's humans who are doing these things. So I think, yes, model complexity for features is higher than 00. For assembly, fiddliness, let's call it a wash again, shall we say. TT is more complex at that level. But then we come to another factor of risk. Risk is a massive component in business, and it has to be. And in fact, maybe it should be put into one of the main categories of this commentary piece. Anyway, clearly, and everyone agrees, Hornby took a massive risk by investing in TT120, pushed by Simon Kohler. They would not have done it, I think, without him, it's fair to say. Now, there is a kind of curve to risk that kind of starts off very, very steep and then flattens out if the product goes well, or increases exponentially if the product is failing. I think the risk curve for TT120 is starting to flatten out, but I think also it's fair to say it surely remains much higher than 00 models being released to the market. You only need to look at the popularity of 00 YouTube channels compared to the TT ones to realize that any manufacturer is taking a clear risk to produce a model in TT. Doesn't matter if it's Helgen or Revolution or Hornby or Pico. There is a higher risk simply because the market is so much smaller and there's still quite a coherence in that grouping. So if something gets a bad reputation, a huge proportion of people will know about it. And if the model bombs, the investment by the company will never be recouped. So risk alone means we should expect TT models to cost more, not less. And I think it's business naivety to think otherwise. The more risk, people look for more returns, and therefore you have to have a higher profit margin because the risk is so high. So these are some preliminary factors. Okay, moving on to the main metrics. Comparable prices, model demand, manufacturer profits. Comparable prices. We've already seen that as far as production itself goes, you might assume TT would be slightly but not significantly more expensive than 00. So is it? How does it compare? Well, take this new Terrier just reviewed by Sam. Go and watch his review. If I remember, I think I'll be linking to it at the end of the video somewhere. So do watch the review. Like I say, this is not an attack on Sam in the least. The Hornby model for a terrier in TT120 costs £159.99. The 00 model costs £164.99. More, but not significant. Nobody's not going to buy a model at that price level for a Sigma fibre. Hornby's brand new 00060, which maybe is a more relevant comparison. The terrier is 6 years out of date now, is £174.99. That begins to be £15 more significant. You're about a 10% price rise for 00. Now, it's also fair to say, of course, you don't have to go to Hornby for stuff, at least not in 00 world. Dapol, I never remember which way to say that. Dapol have a terrier that sells for just £110. Now, it's a plastic-bodied model. They've had problems with even not very straight, I think, running plates and so on. It was announced, so it was designed or began to be designed in 2018. It released in 2020, so it's a 5-year-old model, not by any means ancient, but not brand new either. Adjusted for inflation, it was released at £110. Adjusted for inflation, that would then be about £137 or thereabouts today. That model was not available with any retailer discount. It was a Rails exclusive, I think, in cooperation with Dapol. So you put that into the factor of about 137. At present, the TT Terrier is available in, well, let's say plenty of well-known retailers for about 143. 137, 143, £6 difference. If you were to adjust it for inflation, Dapol haven't, and that's commendable. But I think it's also naive to think that if they were launching it right now, they would have it at £110. They wouldn't. They clearly have stock, and they've kept the price the same. But perhaps we need to think a bit more laterally than just comparing apples and apples, terriers and terriers. If we look at other more niche products, or at least in more niche scales, which TT120 still is, take the 009 locos that are being produced by Bachmann, something like the Quaddy Hunslet. Tiny little loco, dinky little thing. Excellent model as far as I know, £154. Some of the newer manufacturers are beating the big two, Bachmann and Hornby, in terms of pricing. So let's look at Rapido. Rapido, the Serdar class 040, it's not an 060 but an 040, £179 RRP, 153 at the retailers. So given this, it's hard to see anything other than that the TT Terrier is almost exactly in line with what you can try and think of as an equivalent model across the range or even at other scales, both from Hornby, Bachmann, and smaller, newer, more nimble companies like Rapido. The outlier here is not the Hornby, Bachmann, Rapido stuff. The outlier is the Dapol one still at £110. But remember, Sam, in his review of that, gave it a 6.8 rating when he reviewed it 5 years ago. So from the metric of comparable pricing, the Loco's not a rip-off. It's not cheap, it's not a bargain, I'm not arguing that. It's about what you'd expect it to be given the current market. I think that's where we're at. Moving on. Demand for the model. If a model is overpriced in the market, the surest way to tell is by it being left on the shelf. And Sam regularly makes this point if he thinks something is crazily priced. Don't buy this. If you really want it, wait a year or two, it'll be on cheaper. Or sometimes he himself just doesn't buy something for that very reason and then waits until it's cheaper and follows his own advice. Good advice. But we ought not to underestimate the intelligence of the average consumer. Generally, we can tell when we're being had. We can tell when a company is ripping us off, or if a product is simply not worth what is being charged. When that happens, well, the model languishes on the shelves of the TMC or Rails or Kernel or whoever it might be. It appears in railway modeler adverts and so on. It suddenly appears in various online offers. And eventually some kind of fire sale happens. just to shift the things, often at vast discounts. That's demand. Look at the Terrier. That's demand if a model is a rip-off at its original RRP. What's happened with the TT120 Terrier? At present, the SCBR, is that right, South Coast and Brightonville? I'm missing something in there. Anyway, you know the one, the improved engine green one that looks orange to everybody else. That's sold out. Can't get it. And the Southern livery, down to its last few. We're waiting on the BR one to be launched. It's not been launched yet. Another 10 days at least, probably away from that, if not to a fortnight. It's clear then, I think, that supply is scarcely able to meet demand because it's about 10 days, like I say, since these things were launched. It can't be a rip-off in that case. It just can't. It doesn't meet the definition of being a rip-off. I'm not trying to redefine these terms. This is how any of us would feel. And consider TT in general. Some items clearly have struggled and have been in very generous sales, always worth keeping an eye out. And frankly, the RRP from Hornby, they never charge the RRP. You get at least 10% back in Hornby hobby points. And there's almost always some sort of a 10% off this, 15% off that on top of it. So you're usually not paying even the RRP, even from Hornby, let alone from the retailers. Anyway, I digress. Some of the coaches particularly, I think, have been languishing and they have been on sales. They were overpriced, presumably, or over-ordered, which not always quite the same thing, but close. And some of the sets as well have been on, and that again right now, the Scotsman set's on a phenomenal prices now for, 3 lit coaches and a Blink Bonnie. Isn't it Blink Bonnie in the set? But I think I would suggest the sets are not, when they come on sale at least, I don't put them in the same category as other stuff because the sets are by definition loss leaders. They're intended to stimulate demand in the sale, not to indicate lack of demand for the sale. It's not quite the same. I don't think they wanted to lure in new modelers, so Hornby don't mind if they lose £1 or £2 in the sets, if they get people who are going to buy for the next 20 years. So no matter which way you look at it, the metric of model demand refuses to allow the Terrier into the club of rip-off. Demand indicates it's not a rip-off, as does comparable pricing. But there's one other metric I think we should look at, which is exorbitant manufacturer profits. Think of it this way, if you allow the illustration. Why does everyone complain bitterly when the price for your heating goes up again, the price for your electric goes up again, when gas and oil go up again? Why is the government, whoever's in charge, Labour, Tory, who knows who else in the future, why is the government always drawn into these things? Why is it such a political hot potato? Why do they have to be seen to be actors, seen to be tough on these things, or seem to have a plan to bring energy costs back down? Well, because at the same time as these prices going up, inevitably the energy companies themselves are raking in vast profits. And it's not a good look for the companies, certainly not a good comfortable position for the politicians to be in. Companies profiteering then, or engaging in something akin to an extortion, never goes down well and always results in negative PR. So, is that what's going on here? Is there an exorbitant profit margin at Hornby? Is Hornby guilty? Is it sitting there on vast swathes of profit just flowing into the coffers of the company, whilst forcing customers who want this new scale to pay super high prices and even higher profit margins? No, not even close. As probably most of you know, this is not news. Hornby makes a loss, almost always. It's done so consistently for the last 10 years. In fact, well, in the last 10 years, Hornby Hobbit have made a profit on exactly 2 years. And only a pre-tax profit, so not necessarily even a real profit. Their prices are set at that delicate balance between trying to make sure the customer keeps buying but setting it high enough to try and get themselves out of a hole, staving off bankruptcy. The company is not ripping off their customers. Now, all this then to say, I wish their prices were cheaper. Much cheaper. I don't have the business nous to understand really why some companies can offer much cheaper products. I'm looking at you, Oxford Rail, by the way. If you were to do TT, we'd certainly be very interested. Wish they did. But that's far from me believing Hornby are ripping me off, because they aren't. Their balance sheet tells me that. The one thing I do know about the company's finances is their debt, which is reliably estimated to be costing them over £1 million every year in repayment on interest only. That payback has to get included in the retail prices for the models we buy. I wish it didn't, but clearly it must. It must. And if you add in, I don't know if they're doing that or not, no idea what they're doing business-wise, but if you were to add in capital repayments as well, well, you can double that repayment to an annual at least 2 million plus on debt or loan repayments. Now, this is not my area. I am not a financier, but I'm using publicly available figures, and I do suspect I'm not a million miles away. So that might mean that my TT120 loco, when I order it, is £20 more expensive than it would have been had the company I was ordering it from not had debt. But TT120 doesn't survive without Hornby. And that extra £20 means the company survives and I get my wonderful models. And it's roughly comparable to what most other things are in the market. And they're not ripping me off. And the features are good. And the detail is there and the quality is there. I'm buying maybe 1 or 2 locos a year. I can live with that, I think. What do you think? What do you think? Am I just getting hot and bothered for nothing? Are our manufacturers ripping us off? Put it this way, go and have a look at the prices being paid by continental modelers for TT120 or even comparable HO to 200. Then go back to Hornby's offerings. And I don't think we're doing too badly. Anyway, that's more than enough for today. I wasn't expecting to put this out. I wanted it off my chest. I've burdened you with it instead. And as ever, give your own thoughts down below. Give your opinions in the comments. And like and share and subscribe. And there's this new thing called hype. Hype the video. You kind of swipe across from the comments and there's an option to hype a video. Oh, that sounds important. It probably isn't. But if you can, I would appreciate if you give it a go and we'll see where this video might go. You never know. Right. All done. Promise not to spam you on your inbox for quite a while. I appreciate you watching. Bye for now.